attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the afternoon session of the Board of County Commissioners for October 6th, 2020. The first thing on our afternoon docket is a public works item. Just a reminder, before we go into executive session later this afternoon, we will go back into our joint public health meeting to clarify our order this morning. So I'll read us into our public works item and public hearing. This is item 11A on our agenda, the third reading and continued public hearing and setting fourth reading for ordinance number 20-08 in the matter of amending Lane Code 16.244, floodplain combining zone rural comprehensive plan, Lane Code 10.71, floodplain combining district for lands within the urban growth boundaries to modernize terminology and formatting, clarify review processes, and align the code more closely with state law and the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR Title 44, and adopt a savings and severability clause. File number 509-PA20-05047 and Order 20-0818- let me say that just for clarification, Order 20-08-18-13 in the manner of amending Chapter 11 of Lane Manual to remove Section 11.020 Flood Hazard Studies. So I'll start now to explain purposes and rules of the hearing. This is a continued public hearing. The date today is October 6th, 2020. The proposed Lane Code amendments are subject to the applicable criteria identified in Lane Code 12.005, 12.050, and 16.652 subsection 2, and applicable statewide planning goals. The order of the proceedings for this hearing will first be the report by staff, followed by any public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to enable a response may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request that the record be left open and provide an opportunity to present additional written evidence or arguments regarding the application. The board's decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals in accordance with ORS Chapter 197. At this point, I'll call for any disclosure of any commissioner abstentions due to conflicts of interest or bias. Are there any disclosures to be made?
Chair, this is Pete Sorensen. I just wanted to ask staff if Mr. Malone was involved in this at all.
This is staff, Rachel Surslove, planner. I do believe Mr. Malone provided testimony at the last public hearing on September 1st.
Well, then out of an abundance of caution, I'll mention that Mr. Malone is a lawyer in Eugene, and he and I have a business relationship at times. I have not discussed his comments on this legislation. I don't know what they are. But I guess I could read them. But I just wanted to say that I had sought an opinion from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission and disclosed the relevant facts. And they said that I did not have to make this disclosure, but Lane County Legal Counsel recommends that I put this disclosure on the record if there's any question at all about this topic. Thank you.
Okay, if there's not any other disclosures, I'll call for any challenges to the board's qualifications to hear the matter. Are there any challenges? All right, I don't hear any. So we will go to staff to hear their report.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Rachel Surslove, staff planner for Ordinance 2008. And we're here before you today for a third reading and continued public hearing for the floodplain code modernization project. A brief recap on this project. It started last year in the summer of 2019 when the board requested information on wildfires and flood hazards and possible code updates that could be completed on these topics. Staff held a work session with the board on higher regulatory standards for floodplain development as requested, and the direction from the board was to move forward with this project after conducting public outreach, which was done in October of last year. The project then moved through the Planning Commission process, at which staff presented a draft code with higher regulatory standards. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the draft code with several caveats for less stringent regulations than those proposed by staff. However, when we brought the draft floodplain ordinance before the board, we still were proposing more restrictive floodplain regulations than were currently in place now, as requested by the board. A little closer in time, at the September 1st public hearing, the board motioned for staff to revise the proposed ordinance, specifically the floodway language, to prohibit all development except for public uses. Therefore, the ordinance before you today contains this revised languages with only allowances for public uses such as roads and utilities. Also, in regards to this floodway prohibition, the board on September 1st discussed, but did not include in their motion, a replacement of lawfully established dwellings in the floodway. Given this discussion and the importance of allowing replacement dwellings that were lawfully established, staff have provided draft language that allows dwellings that were lawfully placed in the floodway to be replaced within the same footprint as the existing dwelling. And if there is not another location outside of the floodway on the parcel, that the dwelling can be established. Because this was not part of the motion on September 1st, staff is just providing this language in a draft version of the code, and it's provided as attachment 8 of the agenda cover memo. If this language is to be incorporated into the ordinance, the board must make this direction as a part of their motion today. The second policy consideration that I would like to flag for the board is a possible conflict that a full floodway prohibition will create for mineral and aggregate industries. Many of these operations are currently conducted in the floodway, and fill removal is considered development in the floodway. So the extraction of aggregate or stockpiling of aggregate or any berms or other activities associated with mineral and aggregate operations would be considered development in the floodway and would have to comply with floodway or floodplain regulations. Therefore, if all development in the floodway is prohibited, these operations may be prohibited as well. I'll just note that Wildish Sand and Gravel did comment on this project at the Planning Commission stage, but have not yet provided public comment to the board, although I do expect that you'll hear testimony from them today on this topic. The last point that I want to talk on regards dwellings located in the floodway that may have been destroyed by the Holiday Farm fire. On September 1st, when the board motioned to prohibit all floodway development, this disaster had not yet occurred. In response to this event, the chair requested that code language be drafted to exempt dwellings destroyed by the fire from the floodway prohibition. Staff have written up this draft code language that addresses this issue, and it was disseminated to you on October 2nd. I would like to make clear that this language to allow replacement dwellings destroyed by the wildfire is not included in the ordinance before you today, but is a policy option for the entire board to consider and deliberate on. If it's decided that this draft language is to be added to the ordinance, then it will have to be specified in today's motion as well. The proposed language for burned dwellings is similar to the optional replacement dwelling language that I spoke of earlier, in that the dwellings must be replaced within the same footprint as the burned dwelling, and there cannot be another location to build outside of the floodway on the property. If there is another suitable location for rebuilding outside of the floodway, then the owners would be required to use the area outside of the flood hazard area to rebuild. This could cause extra costs to be associated with rebuilding after the destruction of those dwellings by fire. So I would just like to pose that as a policy consideration for the board, to also consider the conditions associated with that clause for rebuilding of burned dwellings in the floodway. As of about noon today, staff has received more than 100 public comments regarding rebuilding homes destroyed by the Holiday Farm fire in the floodplain. Generally, these comments voiced opinions that the board should not adopt floodplain regulations that would prevent rebuilding of burned dwellings. However, I do believe that in many of these comments, there's confusion about prohibiting buildings in the floodway versus the floodplain. I think a lot of the comments think that the board is deliberating on a prohibition of floodplain development, when really the board has motioned for a prohibition of floodway development. And further, staff believes that the floodway prohibition will not have a major effect on property owners rebuilding up the Mackenzie, as many of the dwellings in the Mackenzie area are in the floodplain and not the floodway. From what we can tell from GIS information about the fire and about the dwellings that exist up the Mackenzie, the dwellings that were destroyed were more likely located in the floodplain versus the floodway. From what we can tell, there were only about 4 or 5 dwellings that were located in the floodway that were destroyed by the fire. And if the board provides direction for an exception for dwellings destroyed by fire, then there will be an avenue for those dwellings to be rebuilt. While I have not reviewed all of the comments that we've received in detail yet, a couple of the comments do recognize that more stringent floodway regulations would require rebuilding of the Mackenzie corridor in a way that will better protect from flood hazard. And while a devastating fire did just occur and not a flood, flash floods and hazardous flooding is more likely to occur after a wildfire, given the lack of vegetation and especially going into a rainy season. So staff is still in the opinion that it's justified to pursue higher regulatory standards in terms of floodplain development. And regarding the next steps for this project, because new language was brought before you today, there must be a second reading for this revised language. And I have identified October 20th as being a date for the 4th reading on this project. And also, if the board chooses today to revise any language in the ordinance with any of the draft replacement dwelling language that's been provided for you today, then those revisions should be stated within the motion. And that covers my staff report, and thank you, Chair Buck.
Thank you very much. So we will go to public testimony. At this point, if you're interested in making public testimony, there should be a hand icon on your device and you can raise that. So we will have our moderator take over at this point in order to facilitate any public testimony.
Thank you, Chair Buck. At this time, if you would like to present public testimony, please raise your hand. I do see quite a few hands raised already. I will begin with Michael Gallardi. Michael, it looks like you are not unmuted. I just sent you a pin. I'm going to actually move from Michael Gallardi to Steve Wildish. Steve, I will unmute you and you may begin your public comment.
How's that? Good afternoon.
Good.
My name is Steve Wildish, Vice President of the Wildish Companies. I reside at 2021 Morning View Drive, Eugene. I'm here today to ask that changes to the Lane County Floodplain Development Code do not stray from their primary purpose. Our understanding was that certain technical code changes needed to be made to comply with the FEMA program. In addition, we were told that other changes were being considered to better protect homeowners from catastrophic flooding events. Our comments to the Lane County Planning Commission and the Lane County Board of Commissioners are based upon our real-life experiences and regulatory knowledge related to the floodplain of floodway along the Willamette River and McKenzie River. Wildish has been mining sand and gravel, first along the banks of the Middle Fork of the Willamette River, and more recently the McKenzie River, for over 70 years. At one time, Wildish owned 14 miles of riverfront property along the Willamette and McKenzie Rivers. Today, our riverfront total is just under 8 miles. During our many years of operation, we have performed in-water work to protect our property from erosion, built the sand and gravel conveyor bridge over the McKenzie River, and addressed many floodplain and floodway issues related to the permitting of our sand and gravel properties. In doing so, we worked with numerous agencies, including Lane County, DOGAMI, ODF&W, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, DEQ, the Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA, and North Fisheries. It is important to our company and to the citizens of Lane County that regulatory changes do not adversely impact our ability to mine these significant resources identified in the Lane County inventory. In addition to our interest in protecting Goal 5 sand and gravel resources, we are compelled to comment generally about these code amendments. From what we have seen, this process has shifted, reaching well beyond the focus of the model code to protect residential development. We provided both written and oral comments showing examples of how changes to the code could result in unintended consequences, even causing harm rather than good. The recommendations provided to the board by the Lane County Planning Commission properly focus on the board's primary mission to comply with FEMA guidelines and protect life and safety. Consequently, we ask that the board accept the Planning Commission's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I will now move to Kelly Wood. Kelly, I will reset the timer and you may begin your public comment. Kelly, you may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Wood, and I'm here representing Wildish Sand and Gravel. I've been involved with the proposed code amendment since March and have previously submitted both written and verbal comments. Wildish would first like to thank the Planning Commission and staff for all of the challenging work they have done on the proposed code modernization project. An incredible amount of time, public involvement, and discussion took place over several months for the Planning Commission to proceed with the recommendations to the board on these matters. After attending the Board of Commissioners hearing on September 1st, we noted that several issues raised by both Wildish and the Planning Commission were barely discussed. One major concern that Wildish has at this point is the overlooked recommendation by the Planning Commission pertaining to the compensatory storage standard. To clarify, because the compensatory storage for fill was recommended to be excluded from the code, there were no recommended changes included. If the Board of Commissioners opts to include the standard as it's currently written, it not only has the potential for unnecessary destruction of valuable lands, it will be costly, difficult to implement, and may further endanger wildlife and adjacent properties. During the early stages of the code review, multiple parties, including Lane County Public Works, advised that a no-rise analysis completed by a registered professional engineer or geologist would satisfy the intent of the compensatory storage standard. But because the Planning Commission's recommendation was to exclude the standard altogether, there's no proposed language to allow no-rise analysis as a provision. From a geotechnical, hydrological, and even environmental standpoint, the development criteria proposed in the draft code are arbitrary and unverified. As documented in the August 18, 2020 staff report, even staff recognized that as written, the provision may be impossible to meet in some cases. This statement is very concerning and serves as further evidence that this standard should not be included in the code at this time or without a technical evaluation. Another major item of concern is the proposal to prohibit development in the floodway. I think it's critical that people understand that based on Lane County's definition of development, Wildish would be prohibited from establishing any future extraction areas, stockpile areas, sidewalks, bike paths, or wildlife habitat as part of the reclamation. Additionally, numerous stormwater best management practices recommended by DEQ and other regulatory agencies, which are proven to be effective means of preventing or reducing pollution, would be prohibited under this standard. Wildish is in full support of the Planning Commission's recommendations and asks that the commissioners focus on the purpose of the code and ensuring alignment with the required FEMA language. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I will now go to back to Michael Gallardi. Michael, I will reset the timer and it looks like you are ready to begin.
Good evening, commissioners. Again, for the record, my name is Michael Gallardi. I'm a land use and natural resources lawyer based here in Lane County. My address is P.O. Box 8529 in Coburg, 97408. I'm speaking to you this afternoon to address a very significant technical issue with the rules, which concerns the definition of so-called critical facilities. If this issue is not resolved, it could lead to widespread unintended consequences in the form of very challenging and confusing restrictions on a wide range of uses throughout the floodplain. And I want to emphasize that this critical facilities issue affects the entire floodplain, not just the much more narrow floodway that's been the basis for a lot of the discussion. I submitted a letter to you earlier today, and my comments are going to summarize what's in my letter. So first, I'll speak to what I think the intent of the critical facilities rules is and how they work, and then I'll talk about the specific issues with the definition. So I believe the intent is to discourage essential public infrastructure from being located in the floodplain, things like hospitals and schools and fire and police facilities, so that if there's a flood, these facilities are not affected. Unfortunately, the definition of critical facilities is much broader than that. And the way these rules work is that if you qualify as a critical facility, then you have to show that it's impossible for you to locate your facility outside of the flood plain. And to do that, you have to do an analysis of alternative locations and show that all of those alternatives are infeasible. That's a very difficult standard. It's very easy to dispute whether any given proposal meets that standard, and that's why EWEB asked for a blanket exemption of utility facilities. Now, unfortunately, that exemption doesn't resolve this issue for many other uses. There's two problems with the definition. First, the definition includes anyone who uses or stores hazardous materials. Hazardous materials are defined in the rules by reference to a series of federal and state environmental statutes. The list of hazardous materials under those statutes is very, very broad and includes all petroleum products and all pesticides, including organic pesticides, for example. So if you're a homeowner with a backup generator, you've got hazardous materials. If you're a farm with a diesel tank, you've got hazardous materials. You could be considered a critical facility under these rules. The second issue is that it includes a facility for which even a slight chance of flooding may be too great, but there's no discussion of what risk is trying to be avoided there. I've proposed some language to resolve these issues and encourage you to take a close look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I will unmute Tom Bowerman. And Mr. Bowerman, you are self-muted.
I think I have to turn mine
You
off.
may
Can you hear
begin
me?
your public comment.
Hey, thank you. Well, where to start? Just to apologize that we're having to talk about this during all these other things that are going on in our culture. What a time. I'd ask you to please see my 2-page written testimony if you haven't already. I want to comment on a number of things that I've seen in emails coming into the commission. I see no prohibition to replacing dwellings in the existing or so far proposed amendments in the code language. Representations to the contrary, which I have seen from one commissioner, I feel are disingenuous and are misleading, causing mistrust in some of the public. I think that people are speaking without understanding what the code is really saying. Concerns of the gravel industry, I think, are germane, and I think that that can be addressed by duplicating the way that Deschutes County floodplain ordinance addresses it, which I've addressed in my written testimony, verbatim of what they use. And I think if you do something like that, reflects our original, myself and others who recommended the hazards that are involved in development in the floodway. We're recommending no new dwellings, and the motion that was made was no new development. Development is broader than dwellings, and if you look at the Deschutes County Code, they're talking about dwellings, and they also stipulate that existing dwellings may be replaced. And that is the way that I see the current and proposed amendments, except for the motion and the way that it was constructed. So I think you can address that. Finally, I'd like to say that in the last several years, starting about a half a decade ago, the Lane County invested a lot of time in looking at natural hazards. And one component of that was flood hazards, of which occupy about 30 pages in a several hundred page document about natural risks. And that's worth reading. It really does speak to the risks. I guess I said finally, I'd add one more thing, and that's also referenced in my written testimony. There was recently a large, very large public opinion survey conducted by one of the best outfits in the business out of Stanford University, looking at the way that public views fire and flood risks in our culture. And both the Republicans and the Democrats, who were looked at from political persuasions by majorities of both members of the public of those parties, supported improving and tightening risk factors related to flooding and to fires. And I think that speaks. I see that there are some maybe 50 emails opposing the testimony that's being given. And am I out of time? Well, thank you.
You are now out of time, Mr. Bowerman.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good luck with this.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Chad Smith. Chad, I'm unmuting you, and I show you are still self-muted.
There, can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay. My name's Chad Smith. Hello. I'm a lifelong resident of the McKenzie. We do not own property in the floodplain or floodway, and we may have some confusion exactly on the different descriptions or definitions of the two. However, being a lifelong resident up here, it is concerning when we find out last minute that these changes may be taking place that may affect people that are friends and family along the McKenzie River corridor. I know that you all have been doing your due diligence by putting out public notice. However, this day and age, most people don't see or pay attention to those. So it's hard for general people, working class people, to get their voices heard when they don't know these things are going on until the last minute. And then they don't understand all the ins and outs of it. My question would be, does this code or proposal go above and beyond what FEMA requires? And if so, why? You know, we have a pristine river. It's been pristine for many decades. And yes, this fire will change it. But as long as people are allowed to rebuild on their existing homes along the river, as they should be, then we would support it. If not, then we would not support that. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Ed McMahon. Ed, I will unmute you and reset the timer, and you may begin your public testimony. Ed, you may begin your testimony. I show you are unmuted. Let me move on to Robert Emmons, and we'll try to work out what's going on with Ed McMahon. Robert, I'm going to unmute you and you may begin your public testimony. I do show you are self-muted, Robert.
Now, I should be heard, I assume. Okay.
Yes.
Robert Emmons here, 40093 Little Fall Creek Road, Fall Creek. Earlier today, I sent the commission, all the commissioners, some commentary, broader commentary regarding floodplain regulation that I hope you'll have time if you haven't yet, and I apologize for getting that to you so late. It is rather lengthy, but I hope you'll take the time, have the time to read it later. Now, however, I just simply want to support staff's proposal directed by the commissioner's motion during the first hearing to disallow new construction and I'm using that broadly in the floodway. The dangers have been, I think, amply demonstrated in both words and on the ground. And so having no structures, including appurtenant buildings that may contain or be composed of hazardous materials, is compelling and defensible as a matter of health and safety, and therefore not subject to takings claims. So in conclusion, we commend staff and the commissioners for this first step towards meaningful floodplain protection. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I will return to Ed McMahon. Ed, I will unmute you and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ed McMahon with the Home Builders Association. I'm going to make my verbal testimony short and we'll follow up with written testimony. Assume that since there's going to be a second reading, the testimony record will be open. If not, I suggest or would request that you keep it open. I want to remind you that we are in a housing crisis right now. We are one of the most restricted housing markets in the United States of America, and additional regulation adds another log to that fire. I would strongly recommend that you go back to your Planning Commission's recommendations and do what we need to do to lower the flood insurance premiums for our residences, but not to add additional unnecessary regulation during our current housing crisis. And I thank you for your service.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any other hands raised. If you did call in, would like to give public testimony, please raise your hand. I see Joe Mall has raised his hand. Joe, if you would like to, let me reset the timer and I will unmute you and you may begin your public comment. Joe, I do show that you are self-muted.
How about now?
There you go.
Chair Buck, Co-Chair Bernie, and Commissioners, thank you. For the record, Joe Mall, Executive Director of McKenzie River Trust. Appreciate the opportunity to comment today. As you know, the McKenzie River Trust is built on incentives for good land and water stewardship. We don't have expertise in development of policy, nor do we participate in regulatory enforcement. We do, however, work within those environments and thus try to anticipate what may be coming. Today, I offer one observation, one perspective that I hope you'll consider, and two encouragements. First, the observation. I think it's safe to say that the voices you've heard in the Planning Commission and the board hearings to date are generally the same people you've heard from on these issues for at least the last 20 years. All have committed a tremendous amount of time to learning and keeping up with the intricacies of Lane County codes. On the one hand, this is a great thing that you have some members of the public so knowledgeable and deeply vested in this ongoing process. On the other hand, it begs the question of why something so critical to our long-term community health is arguably off the radar for so many members of the community, at least until a disaster occurs. That leads me to the perspective I hope you'll consider. On the heels of the Holiday Farm fire, exceptions to code are literally falling, draining, and in danger of washing into the McKenzie River today. Exceptions to policy are often predicated on statements like that in the draft language you have been asked to consider for replacement developments in the floodway. It says encroachments may be permitted if, quote, there is no feasible or practicable location for the replacement development outside of the mapped regulatory floodway. Again, I'm not arguing for or against that particular remedy. I'm more interested in our continued development of alternatives. In our best efforts to establish clear and equitable policy on behalf of the public good, individuals will at times be constrained, sometimes to the point of feeling like they have no alternative but to fight or to end run the regulations that derive from those policies. There will be cases when that will be unavoidable. When it comes to issues related to water, I expect that we will see more and more of those cases in the years ahead. We need to get ahead of that by thinking and acting creatively when it comes to providing incentives and alternatives that maintain the public good of the policy while acknowledging the constraints. 10 years ago, Lane County was part of a DLCD pilot program considering transfer development rights. As I understand it, the program did not move forward in part because of limited market demand. TDRs may not be the answer for floodway and floodplain development alternatives, but they're an example of the kind of creative incentives-based perspective I hope you will continue to explore and support across the land and water divisions within Lane County. So finally, to my encouragements. As you enact these updates to code, either today or in a later session, I ask that you invest further in public communication and outreach about your work to ensure the public good. Second, please continue to support Lane County staff working with community partners on the alternatives, the incentive side of the equation. I'm grateful for your willingness as commissioners to take on this difficult task of public policy making, and even more grateful for the staff of Lane County who day in, day out wrestle with the challenges posed when public policy bumps up against individual interests. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I do see one more hand. I see Lori Segal-Vacher. Lori, I will unmute you and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. My name is Lori and I work with Landwatch Lane County. I participated in this September 1st hearing, and I just wanted to state for the people who thought that this was a last minute issue that the county sent out, I don't know, 75,000 notices or something several weeks before September 1st, alerting us all to this, to the first hearing. And I don't really think that they were trying to pull anything off without anybody knowing about what was going on. Secondly, there's been misinformation shared on Facebook. None of these so-called environmental groups that participated in the September 1st hearing asked for made any requests or suggested any recommendations that would have prevented people from rebuilding their homes in the floodplain. Now, we didn't know about the fire on September 1st, of course, but there was nothing presented or recommended that would have or that does prevent development in the floodplain, much less redevelopment of lost homes in the floodplain. What was mostly discussed and a motion made on behalf of on September 1st was the floodway issue. The floodway is different than the floodplain, has rapidly moving high velocity water flow during high water events, and it causes a public health hazard to property and structures. And that issue of development in the floodplain was addressed by those of us there more specifically, pursuant, in other words, we weren't talking development generally and broadly, but residential development. And it was kind of misconstrued in the messages out to the public. And I don't think that was very fair. It wasn't fair to us who spoke, and it's not fair to the people who weren't there and just got this kind of off-base message about what was going on. And finally, flood events will continue. Just because we're in a climate change period where temperatures are rising and the earth is getting warmer, we don't have enough information to know how that's going to affect the Mackenzie River area and the floodway and floodplain generally. However,
thank you for your public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Diana, do you see any further folks that want to?
Oh, sorry about that. I was talking on mute. At this time, I do see Chad Smith. Chad, did you give public comment already?
Yeah.
I did, but my mother is here and we were working off of one phone and weren't able to get hers to connect.
Okay, if you would like to have her give testimony, that would be fine.
Okay, here you go.
Hi, my name is Cindy Smith, and I'm a former business manager of Mackenzie School District. And we have lived up here for so long. And like my son said, we don't have property along the floodway, but we have friends and family who do. And what my son was talking about is how we did not know about this. We did not receive one of those 75,000 notices through the mail or email. So that's a concern. However, what we are concerned about is not only our community and the floodways and the floodplain, it's other communities in our county also. So we just ask that you would please consider the changes and just stick to the technical issues that FEMA raised in their review of our situation. And I realize this was before the fire, but it's important that we all realize that it's not just special interest groups, it's the people of our communities that you need to be taking care of also. And with that, I just ask that you give careful consideration to all of this. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I do not see any more hands raised. I will give one more last call for any hands for people to speak. And Chair Buck, I am not seeing anyone else raise their hands, so I will turn the meeting back over to you.
Okay, at this point, it's time for any additional comments by staff.
Hi, this is Rachel. I would just like to provide a few clarifications from the public comment that we received. In regards to Mr. Bowerman's testimony, I just want to make really clear what's before the board today. The ordinance that is in front of you prohibits any encroachment in the floodway. And in the language of the code, there's some examples given where it says including fill, new construction, substantial improvements, and any other development is prohibited. So in my read of that, that means dwellings are prohibited. And that's in the ordinance that's in front of you. And then to clarify, there are two drafts that were attached to the agenda cover memo. And those drafts include the replacement dwelling language for structures that are lawfully established in the floodway currently. If someone wanted to replace those, they would be allowed to, so long as it's stated within the same footprint and there was no other feasible or practicable location outside of the floodway to replace the dwelling. And those are just drafts. So if the board would like that draft language included in the ordinance, you would have to include that in your motion today. And then I would also just like to clarify about the notice. Notices went out to every single property in Lane County that has a floodplain overlay on it, and that's almost 9,000 properties. So notice would not have been sent to a property that didn't have a floodplain overlay on it. And that was done back when this project began at the Planning Commission stage. I think that's all I've got to say for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now is time for discussion, and if there's any further comments or questions for staff by commissioners. So I'll open it up to commissioners. I do want to note that Commissioner Farr has been on the line listening for some time. And so thank you for being able to join us visually as well. Any comments by Commissioner?
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, this is Pete Sorensen. And first of all, I want to thank everybody who presented public testimony today. I do have some questions about the reference to FEMA and so-called FEMA rules. We're not required by FEMA to make any changes to our existing code, are we?
I can respond to that. So as a part of the community assistance visit for Lane County being our participant in the National Flood Insurance Program, as a part of that audit of our floodplain permitting and our floodplain code, they are requiring that we adopt certain language, that's the model code language, and they are requiring that we adopt that as part of the community assistance visit compliance. If we do not comply with that audit, then we would not be, we may not be able to participate any longer in the National Flood Insurance Program. So if Lane County is—
So it's really not something they're requiring us to do. They're providing an incentive for us to do it, and an incentive that I think we should pursue, but they're not really requiring us to do it. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, within what FEMA suggests to local governments, there are different levels of compliance. And in that respect, will there be a reduction in the amount of money that residents pay if we make the rules more for public safety in the way FEMA is experienced in knowing that there are going to be flooding events? And could you explain the difference between the route that is being proposed versus a lower cost to landowners that participate in the FEMA insurance program if we were to provide for greater public safety? Could you go over that for us?
Yes. So what I think you're referencing is the community rating system, which is a subset of the National Flood Insurance Program. The community rating system is an additional incentive program that may provide additional benefits to insurance premiums for participating communities and for property owners within that community that receives insurance through the NFIP. I can't make any assurances that the higher regulatory standards, if adopted, would for sure get us a better community rating system level, which would mean better insurance premiums, because we haven't gone through that process, and we wouldn't know until the code was adopted and until we went through the community rating system review. So I can't make that assurance, but I think it's reasonable to say that if you are adopting higher regulatory standards, it is possible that that could lead to better insurance premiums for flood insurance.
And that might be to the benefit of Lane County landowners that might want to lower their flood insurance premium.
That's correct.
Yeah. Do you know how many other Oregon counties have this greater public safety protection and lower premiums? I know Lane County does not have it, but what counties do have it? Tillamook County, I believe, is one of them.
I'm not sure. I think
Kira's also here if you want to toss that question to him.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioner Sorensen. So there are a number of communities in Oregon that participate in this community rating system, many of which have higher regulatory standards in place. Lane County does already receive a pretty significant discount on our flood insurance rates because of the things that we do in excess of the FEMA requirements. I do want to step back and just mention, you had a question regarding whether or not it's truly a voluntary program to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. While I guess technically a jurisdiction could opt out or could be flunked out by FEMA, the repercussions are so severe that that's not really practicable. For example, in this current disaster declaration, if we were not a participating member in the National Flood Insurance Program, one of the penalties is that we wouldn't qualify for disaster resistant or disaster assistance relief. So there's really significant concerns about that. So there's pretty strong leverage against jurisdictions to participate in the NFIP. So that's why we do it. I also just want to point out, just kind of circling back to the start of this, this effort really followed on the heels of a flood event in Lane County. We had a flood event in 2019. We had another significant flood event in 2012. So these rules were drafted at the direction of the board, more or less, to respond to a natural disaster and a hazard. And right now, I mean, obviously we're caught up in the wildfire hazard. At that same time, the board also directed staff to look into regulations to help prevent future wildfire catastrophes. So this is kind of part and parcel of that effort. And I guess I will just kind of reiterate and try to reorient the discussion after some of the public testimony, is that in reality, what's being proposed today from staff would not prohibit somebody from replacing a dwelling in the floodway. The regulations wouldn't do that with the new language proposed by staff. And in addition, as Rachel mentioned, we've done an analysis of the impact area. We only believe that's a total of maybe 4 or 5 structures anyway. So I do want to just bring that point back around, because I know there was a lot of concern. I've been reading through the public testimony as I've been sitting and watching this hearing, and that seems like the bulk of the concern is really about that. And so at this point, with the language that's drafted, I think we've sidestepped that issue.
One other question for Mr. Miller, and that is, I've received probably 70 emails opposing this measure, and one of the themes is that Lane County is, by proposing this ordinance, Lane County is taking people's property from them and forbidding them from rebuilding their structures. Where did they get that information, and how true is it?
Well, I'm not sure where folks are getting their information. I would say it's not accurate, though. This proposal before you today, with the change proposed regarding the floodway development, those 4 or 5 houses that are within the floodway, if adopted, this language would not prohibit redevelopment of those structures. And those were the only structures that potentially could have been impacted by the regulations.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. So I just want to walk back through a couple questions to get some clarity here. Does this proposed ordinance and board order go beyond what was requested by the state and the federal government in our community assistance visit?
It goes beyond what FEMA has requested as part of the CAV. It does not go beyond what the board directed staff to undertake.
That wasn't the question I asked. It goes beyond the CAV. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Does it include a prohibition on new construction in the floodway, since the board asked for that?
Are you talking about with the changes that are proposed today or prior?
With the changes that were proposed since the September 1st board direction to add that in there.
Right, so as of today, this proposal with the language that's proposed would not prohibit redevelopment of structures within the floodway. New development within the floodway would be prohibited.
So then I'm confused because there's two different proposals for draft language for exceptions to reconstructing existing dwellings to be added to this ordinance. One specific to governor's declared emergencies and another one that's kind of generalized. Why do we need those exceptions if you have a right a right to reconstruct an existing dwelling under this code proposal?
I can clarify that point. So the ordinance before you prohibits all development except for public utilities and roads. So that means a dwelling would be prohibited from the floodway. But after the fires occurred, there was a request for an exception for those dwellings that had been destroyed by fire to be able to replace them. And that language has been presented to you. I believe I emailed it to the board on Friday, October 2nd. And that's a draft piece of language that if the board wants to include that in the ordinance, they would have to read that into the motion today. And then we could revise the ordinance when we came back for the fourth reading to include that replacement dwelling language.
So the ordinance as publicized would prohibit the reconstruction of those 4 dwellings that you've noted that are in the floodway that were destroyed by the fire without us adding in that language for the exception. I just want to make that clear because I've been accused of saying, falsely that the ordinance as proposed would have prevented people from rebuilding their units, and it does without adding that exception in there. We'll get to the exception in a little bit because the exception's faulty and is easily appealed. I just want to clarify another issue. Does this ordinance require additional, more restrictive development code and development styles for people constructing in the floodplain?
Yes. As the board initially requested higher regulatory standards, for instance, the elevation requirement is 2 feet instead of 1 foot. So that would above the base flood elevation for elevating structures. So that would be considered a higher regulatory standard for development in the floodplain. It's not prohibitive though.
No, it's not prohibitive, but it would make it more difficult possibly to reconstruct a house destroyed by the fire if they have to meet the new code versus the old code. Is that an accurate statement?
I'm not I don't know if it would make it more difficult. It's a different standard.
An extra foot of elevation is an extra foot of cost. I don't know how you can't say that's not a more higher standard for reconstruction, for fire damaged reconstruction in there. And I just want to say that some of the statements around the fact that some of those organizations that in our September hearing didn't ask for additional restrictions in the floodplain. One of the restrictions they are asking us to change was to go from 50 cubic yards of fill to 7. cubic yards of fill as far as needing permits go, and a couple other places. So I just want to say that there's been a lot of stuff thrown around here that is not quite all the way there. Getting to the actual idea of putting an exemption in there, one specifically for governor declared emergencies. I kind of wonder what happens to the house that we might lose this winter to a landslide, or next spring to a hazard tree that suddenly decides to let go, whether they're going to be considered part of the governor declared emergency or not. And the burden of proof, I guess, will be on the person who loses their house. And one of the things about land use actions is the burden of proof is on the applicant. So everyone that's going to be reconstructing either in the floodway or floodplain, whether you're the 4 houses in the floodway, or you're the multiple houses in the floodplain, your burden of proof is going to be on you. First that you had an existing house there, and that's going to be challengeable. But this idea that there's no feasible or practical ability to move a house, is that an appealable item? Could somebody that decides that they think that the 10 square feet that might be out of the floodplain that's on a 35% slope is a feasible location and can appeal based on that, out of the floodway, I should say. Is that feasible or practical language in the exception an appealable item?
I'll take a shot at responding to that. And Commissioner Bozovich, I think, as our county council reminds us often, anything in land use is typically appealable. I would say that language is very susceptible to appeal just because it's not necessarily clear and objective. When you talk about site conditions like slope and things like that. An alternative to that, and that's why I asked Ms. Surslev to kind of highlight that piece of language in the code, would be to just, instead of requiring replacement in a different location on the site, if feasible, just replacement in the same footprint if it's one of these pre-existing legal houses that's destroyed. So there are, again, ways to address that concern as well.
Yeah, and that's part of what I'm getting at. It's really, at this point in time, every new thing we add to somebody that's trying to reconstruct there is going to add time to their reconstruction. One of the things I'm concerned about is not only are people in a floodplain or floodway, they're also a non-conforming use because their house was built in the 40s or sometime prior to Senate Bill 100, and they're in a zone that doesn't really allow a dwelling. And there's a clock that starts ticking on replacing a non-conforming use due to fires. Is that a true statement?
So you're kind of getting into some territory that we want to talk with the board about at our work session coming up at the end of the month. There's a lot of really thorny legal issues involved here. So that's one of the things that we're looking into. It's not a one case or one answer fits all situation. So I'm a little reluctant to respond to it at this time.
Okay. Well, there are non-conforming uses that do have a clock that starts ticking on replacement. What I'm concerned about is every place we add to that time clock, we're adding one more stress and time to people getting back in homes. And it is germane to this discussion somewhat because one of my objections to moving forward with the way the board has chosen to amend this Planning Commission recommended ordinance and has not gone back to the public with it, is going to create more time and more possible difficulty for folks trying to replace homes. Exception in there or not, it's going to start causing problems for folks and adding cost, adding time. And as Keir noted, it's a hugely complex issue, replacing homes. I think earlier in the meeting, it's been stated that only 11 homes out of 500 have been replaced in Malibu after 2 years. I don't want to be here in 2 years reporting that only 11 homes out of the 400 and some damaged by the Holiday Farm fire have been replaced. I want to see how fast we can keep this moving forward with this as proposed without sending it back to the Planning Commission, because there is that whole issue about citizen participation that we kind of skipped over by amending it at the board level. I think is just the wrong direction to go. And I think we really need to rethink this and try and do everything we can to make sure it stays easy for folks to rebuild after the Holiday Farm fire. And there's a whole nother issue about whether or not going past FEMA requirements is truly life safety, and we're avoiding Measure 49 claims. That's the portion of the taking a property that maybe Commissioner Sorensen referenced, that you may not have understood its property rights that are being taken, not physical property, a right to rebuild or right to reconstruct, or creating cost in that reconstruction that is a cost and a taking of a kind to a property owner. And if we are going beyond life and health safety, which we just admitted that we're going beyond the Citizen Advisory Committee Community Advisory Visit recommendations, we're going beyond life and health safety. I mean, we're doing it for, quote, life and health safety reasons, but we're going beyond what the federal government recognizes is the minimum we need to do, which then puts us into a hugely questionable legal status and something easily challenged in court, just like that subjective language of feasible or practicable. Once we go beyond what the federal government's recommending, we're kind of in that gray area that's easy to appeal.
Commissioner Berney.
Forgive me, but after hearing all that, it's clear as mud. I appreciate learning from all those that provided public input. I recognize that there are significant issues here, which we are going to continue to grapple with, think through, look at ramifications, etc. But let me tell you what I think is the biggest issue right now before us, and it is, in my opinion, a non-issue. I read and agreed with Commissioner Buck's suggestion before a couple of days ago that any existing structure be exempt from any additional requirements, or in any way we would stop people from rebuilding as quickly and as easily as is safe and practical. So I must say that I find what we have here, and Commissioner Bozovich, I respect you. I would much rather be on the same side of every issue with you than not, but on this one, to at this point get our mailboxes flooded with, as Keir had said, people that have misinformation and are conflating issues. We have had the most devastating, horrific fire on top of people losing jobs and children not going to school. It is a very stressful moment in our lives. And to then put fuel on a fire and suggest that county commissioners may be adding additional requirements for rebuilding lost homes, I don't understand that. I think what we need to do is agree, one, with that exemption, that one of the things the County Board of Commissioners wants to do is not get in the way, but facilitate in any way we can the rebuilding and getting back to home. Personally, on that item, I think that there are things we can do. Now, this is separate from the floodway discussion. I think that there have got to be ways we can speed up permits for people replacing burnt homes. There have got to be ways, perhaps, we can identify legitimate engineering firms in town and delegate and expand our capacity to allow them to do some of that work with people paying them instead of the county. Ed McMahon, you've testified here. I saw and tried to read your thing, but you gave me about 40 minutes and we were being flooded with things. But from what I could see, it sounded reasonable and I want to study that. And it basically said, don't apply arbitrary new standards to dwellings that were built under different rules. So I apologize, I don't mean to go on, but I believe that that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. That whatever changes we end up dealing with or that FEMA either demands or encourages will not apply retroactively in any way to anyone that has lost their home through the fire. I don't believe we should conflate the two. I don't think that helps us unify. We can support those who've gone through this horrendous event and still plan for the future in a safe way, considering the safety of residents, the sustainability of environment, and the support of commerce. So that, and let me just share what I'm talking about. One of 70 emails I got, ironically, the last name was Angst, which I think this is part of why I'm frustrated. I understand there is a plan to create a new flood zone plain. I don't think that's the case. That would affect current wildfire victims who have lost their homes. It would be completely unfair to change the rules during this time. Of course it would for you. People have lost everything they own and shouldn't have to worry that they won't be able to rebuild on their property. Of course they should not have to worry about that. So that's all I want to say. I'm going to be supporting moving this forward for a fourth reading, but I want my comments to support unity and figuring out how we can solve this together, not divisiveness when people are already so stressed. Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to insert myself into the queue. Now, most people have been working with me throughout the wildfire, know how staunchly protective I am of the McKenzie River folks. They have been through hell. I want to address the large number of emails that have come in recently. Some are unaware of where that began. Given my protectiveness, you can imagine my disappointment when I read when one of our commissioners posted on Facebook that not only are we considering this today, which is fine, but that it could infringe on wildfire victims rebuilding. Knowing that I had previously asked staff about a week ago now if they could bring forward language that would exempt wildfire victims from any current code that we are discussing, and that we heard here earlier by staff today. This was all known by commissioners prior to this Facebook post. I find it reprehensible that it was used in a way to stoke fear, to draw on raw nerves of our community in order to get attention-getting headlines. We have a place here to talk about policy. And we can talk about policy all day long. But you don't use wildfire victims' raw nerves, anxiety, and pump them up in order to get attention on your personal political views on this language. Garnering respect from commissioners means coming to this board, discussing our ideas with critical thought, facts, and based on our personal values. Not by using fear to get people all confused about what we're talking about here today. I find it unprofessional, unethical, and beneath the office of commissioner to utilize this platform, which garners wide attention in our community, to stoke that fear. We need to be here together to help them through. I will be a staunch supporter in helping people rebuild in the McKenzie community. The McKenzie residents deserve an apology from Commissioner Bozevich. Commissioner Bozevich.
Thank you. So first of all, I just finished walking staff through exactly how this ordinance would prohibit or cost additional time and money for folks rebuilding from the fire. Second, Chair Buck directed staff to do work on her single direction outside of board agreed rules that no more than 15 minutes of staff time could answer to any single commissioner. And the direction she gave was to develop an exemption that is flawed legally. And I've explained why it's flawed legally. I fear, honestly, without developing fear and trying to play on fears, that we are going someplace with a regulatory that is going to cause problems for folks rebuilding. I fear that our entire land use code is going to cause considerable problems, and developing additional requirements above and beyond what the federal government has asked us to do at this time, I think is unwise. If you're willing to somehow or another put a bond up that guarantees that no one will ever be affected by this code that's trying to rebuild, and that your exemption is somehow or another bulletproof in court, you know, maybe I'll step aside, but I don't believe it is. And I was actually the one contacted first by the media, asking questions because they had gotten contacts from citizens upriver about this. I didn't suddenly generate the idea that this might be a problem. The citizens did when they started figuring it out. And I was contacted by the news media to respond to those concerns. And when I looked into it, I realized, yes, it is a problem. Now, if the chair wants me to apologize for pointing out the fact that we are possibly creating a problem, I can't do that. And I can't do that because the chair's presented what I believe is a legally flawed exemption and easily challenged in court, or at least having the ability to be utilized to delay projects, which has been a tactic of third parties in this county for a long time. Appeal, 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 eventually lose, but delay and possibly stop. And I don't want us to put people through that. So, you know, my intentions are to try and do everything I can to help those folks rebuild. And I believe that a public notice that was given out maybe 9 months ago now on a different set of rules and a different set that came through planning commission hearings and now has been suddenly changed to be more restrictive. It may be time for us to pause, send this back to the planning commission, restart the public process. But I think if we keep moving ahead with this, we are taking the chance that we are putting another roadblock in front of those folks upriver. And it's not fear mongering. It just happens to be the simple truth and my long-term experience in land use, something that I don't think anyone else on this board has. How many of you have actually developed subdivisions? How many of you have actually developed shopping centers in Lane County? Yeah, I saw you get ready to jump in there, Joe. This isn't California. Under Oregon's Senate Bill 100 and 19 statewide planning goals, which, by the way, Lane County is the only county that has all 19 goals that apply. So I'm sorry, I can't apologize for trying to be the warning bell to kind of slow things down. Not only that, we're talking about something that's going to impact possible home construction across the county. This just doesn't apply for the Mackenzie River folks. This applies for anyone living along a waterway that has a designated floodway and floodplain in Lane County. So this applies to everyone in my district along Lake Creek, along Knowles Creek, along Sweet Creek, along the Siuslaw River, the North Fork, Long Tom River, you name it. And I don't want to see us get more restrictive on some of those folks at this time either. But we really just need to back up, I think, slow down, and make sure we're not making a mistake. And I quickly drafted under one commissioner's order exemption without having it out in the legal community. I mean, Mr. Ghilardi even noted how bad our definition of critical facilities and how complicating that could be in this ordinance right now. And folks are willing to move forward with that. I just can't apologize for asking folks to chime in and ask us to slow down. Now, some people made the mistake of conflating additional restrictions as far as regulations go with taking more property or expanding the floodplain. That's just the fact that people don't always speak land management code language. And I apologize for any confusion there. But I have walked you through how this will actually impact fire victims. I've also walked you through how I think the exemption's flawed. And I believe it's in our best interest at this time to say, whoa, hold up, slow down, send it back to the Planning Commission, maybe even think about just going strictly back to whatever was required under the CAB and just leave it at that.
I'll respond. I think you missed my point. The issue that I feel is in denial is the use of the emotions of people that have gone through huge trauma right now. I don't mind the fact of discussing the language in the code. That's our job. The problem I have is stoking those fears and using those victims' voices to confuse and get tens, 50, 100 emails in right before this meeting. That's my issue. I called staff and said, what would this ordinance have as an effect to anybody that was affected by the Holiday Farm fire? They said to me, as they did for you today, that it would affect maybe 4 or 5 people. And I wanted to make sure that those people didn't have a problem in rebuilding, and asked what would the language be to make sure that they can. This is what was presented to us today for consideration. I am hoping that our board will seriously consider that language, even if it is just for 4 or 5 folks. I can't imagine a commissioner not wanting to add language that protects them from rebuilding so that they can rebuild. And this code, as it's presented, with additional language that protects them so they can rebuild, is actually rebuilding with resiliency. I hope that somebody can move forward a motion so that we can continue discussing this. This has been quite a bit of time in order to move this code forward all year long. It does deserve a conclusion. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Listening to this very intently, and we're beginning to get a little bit of personality butting in this conversation, something I've never seen in the planning commission, for instance. But I'm going to ask you a question, Joe, to repeat some. Wrote down a quote of yours, and I want to make sure I got pretty close to the accurate quote here. I wrote, "We should not restrict building replacement of any kind in the fire area. We need to facilitate in any way we can rebuilding and replacing residences." Is that accurate?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, I agree with that. And facilitation, if you look it up, there's a large company in West Eugene that doesn't call their managers managers. Jerry's calls their managers facilitators. So I know the term very well. Facilitate means to make things easier to do correctly. And I think I'm in full agreement with that we need to facilitate rebuilding of not just the residences that may be affected by the ordinance that we're considering, but all residences that have been damaged or destroyed in the fire. But it goes beyond that. Anytime, whether it's in a wildfire or in any other kind of an emergency situation, we need to be able to help people to facilitate rebuilding of the homes. I agree with that. I think I agree with moving this forward to a fourth reading. I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen because a part of facilitation means removing unnecessary, unneeded, and costly additional expense. So if we're requiring additional elevation to build with more resilience, shall we say, then we're not facilitating. We're making it more difficult for people to replace their existing dwelling, particularly people whose insurance may not pay for the entire cost of the replacement. So there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen, but it goes beyond Mackenzie Valley. The discussion is regarding how do we allow people to rebuild their homes that are destroyed in the floodplain or in the floodway for future, not just in the Mackenzie Valley. So we're looking at something that is going to go beyond the current emergency that we're rebuilding from and lead deep into the future. So I believe there's a lot more discussion that needs to be held here, and remove it as much as we can from the emotional part of it. And let's talk about facts. And I would agree with letting the Planning Commission, turning it back to the Planning Commission, having them reconsider the entire ordinance and give us language that is going to be less emotional, less stirring, and ultimately helps us to facilitate building houses in Lane County.
Sure, Bernie.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the words, but I wish I did, because I would like to move the fourth reading. I'd like to move the fourth reading with the staff recommended changes. Keir, did I hear you correctly? Are we going to have a work session to deal with some of the legal issues, which maybe we can deal with some of the concerns that Commissioner Bozovich has? Is that correct?
That's correct. It's currently scheduled for the 27th of this month, and it's going to be a broader look at all of the development issues in response to the Holiday Farm fire, where staff is actively working to bring more staff on board and improve our processes to try to help the recovery effort as quickly as possible. And there will be a much broader discussion at that time.
So given that, and given how the world has changed since our last discussion on this floodway issue, and, even though I also have some residue from sort of the process that we've experienced recently, I also believe in the good intentions of every commissioner. Can we not have that? Will we have that before there's a fourth reading? Will we have that work session to deal with some of these issues, to give us a chance to look at the voluminous amount of input we received hours before now from various perspectives on this before a fourth reading, Keir, so that it will inform our reading and we can move forward one way or the other?
I believe Ms. Surslev had a date in her back pocket for a potential fourth reading, and I can't recall what that was. Rachel, can you remind me?
I had October 20th identified as a fourth reading.
Which is why I'm mentioning this, because wouldn't it be so much better to have this informed after that work session for a fourth reading?
Chair, I believe the other meeting you had mentioned was November 11th. Is that right?
November 4th, I typed that wrong.
November 4th. So this.
Chair, I have a motion.
This is, can I interrupt?
Who is?
Commissioner, this is Andy Clark, sorry. I had to jump off the computer and back on my phone because my laptop died. I wanted to interrupt real quick just to lay out what I think is necessary for the motions that folks may or may not want to make. Considering that we have this additional length that came in late, it hasn't been made part of the ordinance that was read today. I think what needs to happen, if there's a interest in including that exception language, there needs to be a motion to include it and also have it read verbatim. And then if folks want to make a motion to have a fourth read on revised ordinance, I think that's appropriate. I think it needs to be a two-step process to be clear what exactly the ordinance is that we deal with.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a motion to have staff read in the proposed changes that staff is recommending, and to require that there be no prohibition on replacing dwellings in the flood plain, and that there be no dwellings in the floodway. However, development in the floodway would be allowed, and that existing dwellings can be replaced, but no new dwellings can be built. And last but not least, to have staff evaluate the savings, which could be up to 75%, if the public safety regulations were tightened. And finally, to have a fourth reading and continued public hearing and on ordinance number 20-08.
Okay, for clarity.
So that's my motion.
For clarity in that motion, you had mentioned no develop in the floodway, and then there was development in the floodway.
No, I mentioned that the previous motion that was made in the last meeting that Commissioner Burney made was that there be no development in the floodway, and our sand and gravel people and utilities and others have come in and pointed out reasons for allowing such development and continued development. But the real issue is whether there could be dwellings built in the floodway or not. And that's what I think is important for us to make a policy choice on. And I'm also very interested in hearing staff further report on the savings. As I understand it, the rating system is 1 to 10, 10 being very little protection for the public, number 1 being the most protection. We're currently at a 7. Lane County residents get a 15% reduction on their FEMA insurance. If we went all the way up to 1, they get a 75% reduction. And before all of this information is quoted and people try to figure out whether they could get a reduction in their flood insurance, I think the board needs to hear more on what that reduction really would be, rather than just the information that I have acquired that may not be accurate. But I think it's generally accurate that the people will get a bigger reduction if we provide greater protection for health and safety, and that's what we're trying to do here.
Okay. Would there be a way that you can succinctly restate your motion?
I would say first and foremost that I would like to direct staff to report back on the possible savings and what would be required to strengthen this ordinance to provide for greater public safety, and to report back on the cost savings that may or may not occur if we went from a rating of 7 to a rating of 1, from a savings of 15% to a savings of 75%. Get more report from staff on that topic. Number 2, do not prohibit replacing dwellings in the floodplain. So do not stop the replacement of those dwellings, but to have no dwellings, but development in the floodway, reversing the prior motion. And last but not least, providing for a 4th reading and continued public hearing on ordinance number 20-08, leaving the record open.
Is there a second?
I'll second, so that we can have discussion.
All right, discussion. Commissioner Bozievich.
So if I understand the motion, it's really asking staff to come back with a rewritten ordinance, which means it's going to require a 5th reading because we are not reading the exact language today because he's asking for changes in, development versus homes, et cetera. I'm not even sure I could repeat the motion. And I just want to make one thing clear. It's not just about the 4 or 5 homes in the floodway. It's about the multiple homes in the floodplain that the additional restrictions will add cost to. And like Commissioner Farr pointed out, does not facilitate reconstruction to add cost. And, as we talk about this, so the fact that we're not sending this back to the Planning Commission, this motion, I will be voting against it.
Any other discussion?
I just want to say that I do agree with one point that was just raised, and that is, I believe it is correct that it would require an additional reading because it's not clear what all these revisions would reveal. And I do agree that it should be continued for discussion. Also, there was a request that we keep the record open, and I think the public has a right to see this revised ordinance. And it may well be that we want to, take another look and maybe even hold another public hearing. I don't think it's appropriate to return this to the Planning Commission. They've already made their recommendation. We're working on an ordinance that needs to be looked at by the board. And if additional public hearings need to take place, then so be it. And perhaps additional public hearings will take place in the context of we are doing what we can to protect the public from identifiable public safety issues, especially flooding. Thanks.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. And I disagree with Commissioner Sorensen. I believe this should go back to the Planning Commission, and a couple of reasons why. We as a board are hastily wordsmithing an ordinance at this point in time. We're adding a little bit here, we're adding a little bit there, asking staff to do things, and without a great deal of time for deliberation. We don't have time or mechanism for deliberation at a regular board meeting, which is what we're trying to do right now. The Planning Commission can look at it more deliberately in a true work session situation where they can actually discuss back and forth in a non-confrontational manner the new information that's been provided through the event of the wildfire and other issues that may come up. So once again, as a board, we don't do a very good job of changing ordinances while we're sitting here at the in a board meeting and asking staff, giving them a relatively abbreviated set of instructions to rewrite the ordinance to a fashion that we believe is going to work the next time. So I believe it should go back to the Planning Commission. I believe they need to take more time on this with new information that's been presented. And I think the only reason for haste, well, we don't have any reason for hastiness on this. Earlier, we'd heard that to qualify for National Flood Protection Insurance, we had to move quickly with the ordinance, or we had to pass the ordinance. I heard today, and Ms. Surslove, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that we don't know that that's going to save the residents of Lane County money on their insurance, whether it is or not. So that doesn't seem to be a particularly urgent reason to move forward with haste. So I suggest and I'd recommend that we send it back to the Planning Commission with new information and let them, in a more deliberative fashion, rework the ordinance and send it back to us at a future date.
Commissioner Bernine.
For what it's worth, and see, my problem is people make sense to me that aren't always agreeing with each other. So let me explain my position on this. I'm going to support the motion. Before we have a fourth hearing, I want to have that work session that Keir talked about. I want to study the input that, because I felt the input provided by, forgive my paraphrasing, but by the Wildish group, as well as input from home builders, as well as input from some of our trusted environmental groups. I want to study it. Don't have time to now. Want to have the work session, and then I very well may choose to move forward, or I very well may support what Commissioners Bozovich and Farr have said, that yeah, I mean, we're dealing with wildfire, evacuees, unmet needs. We all are committed to helping them rebuild as soon as possible. There may not be the rush there was before these wildfires occurred. So that's why I'm voting how I am and how I'm looking at moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I just had a quick comment.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that I agree with Commissioner Berney, and the setting of the report back and the continued public hearing, we can always set it for a date out into the future that will work for the board. And there have been many times when we have rolled a particular reading and told the public that we're really not ready for that reading. And so we can do that, or we can just set it out. If we're going to have that work session on November 4 regarding the fire, I see no reason why we can't set the reading for this out into a Tuesday in December, so that it will allow the board to have that work session on the fire and the assistance that the county is trying to provide to the victims of the fire, and but still keep this this ordinance moving. And also, I know it sounds like I'm hammering on this, but I really believe that if we were to provide for greater protection for flooding, that we could get a much bigger discount for our landowners on insurance, and it might actually motivate more people to buy that FEMA flood insurance. So I don't think that's in any way a dead issue. I want to know how much money we will save our constituents if they get we go up on that ladder from where we are, apparently 7, and what would we get if we could get to another couple of points up the ladder? It might be a very tiny amount of restriction for a great deal of savings. And remember, this is for all landowners in Lane County that are potentially victims of flooding. So it's a big financial thing, and it meets well with the plan to have the work session on what are we doing to try to help the victims of this fire. It also provides time to get more detail on the answer to the question I raised about improving our rating and lowering the cost for our residents. Thank you.
All right, I'm being told that a possible date is November 11th, which would follow our November 10th, it looks like actually, November 10th. That would follow our 11/4 work session on the other items as Keir mentioned. So that would work, November 10th.
Do you want me to make that part of the motion?
Yeah, that should
so we'll
be.
have a fourth reading on November 10th.
To jump in again, if I can interrupt Andy Clark again, if you just want to give staff direction, you don't need to read anything verbatim like I was saying earlier. If you just want to give staff direction as to what to include or not include in the ordinance that's coming back for that would be fine.
Thank you for that clarification. I didn't want to legislate at this hearing. I wanted to direct staff, and then we would come back for the continued consideration of whatever staff comes up with.
Understood. So what I was saying is I've heard some words in here, like we were having an emotional debate or it's combative. Usually those words are mentioned when I as a woman or we as women speak our opinions to a group. I want to make sure that people know that when I'm expressing my opinions, I do it as validly as any other commissioner. It should not be interpreted as emotional. It is simply my opinion to a group of other commissioners. Just want to make that clear. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call for the vote. We have a motion by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Burney. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
No.
Motion passes 3-2 with Commissioner Bozievich and Commissioner Farr in the nay. All right, that took a while, but we'll keep moving on our agenda. Move back, we have item 12, which is committee member recognitions. Mr. Mokrzycki.
Thank you, Chair. And we unfortunately don't have the two individuals we're going to recognize are not able to join us virtually today, but this is being taped and we still do want to recognize the incredible service that both Mr. Weeks and Mr. Thorpe have given to Lane County and to our Planning Commission. First, I would say, I think, arguably maybe I'll go out on a limb here and say this, but my opinion is that the Planning Commission is arguably the most challenging advisory body to the board that receives the least amount of sort of recognition or attention. And yet it's critical in terms of participating in a lot of the things that you just had a lengthy discussion about, land use planning and really important work. So we want to just take the opportunity to recognize two individuals who are leaving service, have left service as members of the Lane County Planning Commission after several years. First, Robert Weeks. During his term from February 14th, 2017 to September 30th, 2020, Robert Weeks served as vice chair from 2017 to 18 and chair from 2018 to 19. His commitment to thoughtful and balanced consideration of land use matters and supporting the facilitation of processes with decorum was evident. In his term, Mr. Weeks participated in forming recommendations for several major projects, and I'm going to list a number of these, including the Lane County Parks Master Plan and the Lane County Solid Waste Master Plan. Lane County Chapter 14, plus to a second round of updates to respond to the LUBA remand and streamline the appeals process. The Lane Code Chapter 16, Code Modernization, the City of Cresswell Comprehensive Plan Update, the Floodplain Code Modernization Project, and much more. And all of this was in addition to hours of training and work sessions on land use matters that our planning commissioners participate in. So we are just so appreciative of Mr. Weeks' time, dedication, commitment to careful review and comments on land use matters. And we thank, again, Mr. Weeks for his wonderful years of service. We also want to recognize Larry Thorpe, who for 8 years, like in two presidential terms, a long period of time, nearly a decade, from 2012 to 2020, for his time and dedication to the Planning Commission. So he served 2 full terms on the Lane County Planning Commission, but he also served as vice chair from 2013 to 2015 and as chair from 2015 to 2016. Mr. Thorpe has provided invaluable insights over the last several years, drawing from his career in law and his expertise in land use matters. His commitment to modernizing and improving the code, streamlining the land use process has been so appreciated by our staff, by our residents, and by the board. To name just a few projects that Mr. Thorpe has contributed to, he has been involved with reviewing matters related to Envision Eugene, Goshen Great Plan, including a Goal 14 exception, which is no small feat, the City of Florence Coastal Wetland and Riparian Comprehensive Plan updates, the Lane County Planning Commission bylaw overhaul, FEMA biop tracking, recreational marijuana regulations, City of Coburg UGB expansion and transportation safety plan, Springfield 2030 plan and UGB expansion, Chapter 13, 14, and 16 code modernization projects. I'm about a third of the way done with Mr. Thorpe's list, just to give you an idea. Chapter 14, again, to streamline the appeals process and respond to LUBA remand items, a number of post-acknowledgement, privately initiated plan amendments and zone change applications, particularly in 2016 and 17, the Hazeldale Quarry project, more updates to the bylaws to modify the coastal area requirement. We're getting closer. Willamette Metro Plan amendments, including a map amendment for the Thurston Hills natural area, the City of Eugene's River Road Santa Clara neighborhood project and urban reserves project, the Lane County Parks Master Plan. I think I need a drink of water. Lane County Solid Waste Master Plan, City of Cresswell Comprehensive Plan updates, Floodplain Code Modernization, and the Lane Code Chapter 15 Code Modernization Project. That's what 2 full terms as a Lane County Planning Commission will get you. We so much appreciate the time, dedication, and commitment to streamlining and modernizing the code, and your legal insights, Mr. Thorpe. Thank you is an understatement, and wish you all the best of luck and hope that you won't be a stranger if you ever want to participate in land use matters in the future. And I know, commissioners, that several of you have had the opportunity to work with Mr. Weeks and Mr. Thorpe. And so welcome your comments and thoughts. We just want to thank both of these individuals for their incredible contributions. And you can see, they don't oftentimes get recognized, these folks who volunteer their time and commitment to really important work, but we want to take a moment here today to thank them for their great efforts.
Any comments by commissioners? Commissioner Bozievich.
I just want to say that I was on the interview committee for both these applicants when they applied to the Planning Commission, and was impressed with them at that time and the work they've done since. It's just a really great service they provided their community. And Mr. Mokrajewski is correct. This is one of the hardest committees for people to volunteer and serve on because it requires an amazing amount of background reading and a lot of time. And I just want to thank both of these individuals for their time and service to our community.
Any other commissioner? I'll say that, you know, I'm very sensitive to volunteers that donate their time when we know that they could be doing anything else but being on the planning commission. They could do anything else with their time that they're volunteering it for the county. And that is really generous and appreciated by the community at large. Thank you very much, Mr. Thorpe and Mr. Weeks.
And Chair, I didn't ask, oh, sorry, I see Commissioner Burney was going to say something. I believe that Keir Miller and Amber Bell are on the line. So if they, maybe after Commissioner Burney is done, if they had anything that they wanted to add from the staff perspective as well.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry. I simply wanted to say that I did not know these two people. If our last discussion is any indication, every member of the Planning Commission is heroic. And I also, as someone who volunteered time without pay after retirement before taking this on, it is unfathomable to me the community service and service ethic people have that are on this commission. So without knowing you both, I commend you and thank you.
Commissioner Farr. We'll need your audio, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I'll join in the applaud for the work on the Planning Commission in particular because of the immense amount of work it takes. You know, I was on the Eugene City Council for 10 years and I served with a councilor for 8 years who always stated that commission work and recommendations from the commission are just that the board, or in that case, the city councilor should make their decision based upon their own judgment, not based upon input from the Planning Commission. And I've always disagreed with that. I've always thought that if the city council and now the board of county commissioners had as much time to work on issues as the planning commission has to work on this particular relatively narrow scope of issues. Now it's broad in that it's a great deal of issues surrounding land use, but it's narrow in terms of what a board of county commissioners addresses. The depth that they go into it, we should always take absolute care before we overturn whatever recommendations that they make. And really, when you work on the Planning Commission, you know how much time it takes to come to the deliberated decisions that you pass forward to the Board of County Commissioners or the City Council if that's the Planning Commission that you're on. I want to thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the often thankless work that you do. And really applaud your work, in particular on the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Keir, please.
Thank you. I think I appreciate Steve offering staff an opportunity to give some feedback and thoughts. From a staff perspective, these are the types of commissioners that we really like to work with the most. I mean, they dug into the information, they worked, tirelessly. I know that Commissioner Weeks does truly have a servant's heart. He's been reaching out to me, contacting me even after his service has ended. He's a resident of the Mackenzie River, and he's working with the constituents up there. That work goes on. He still is reaching out to staff, trying to understand issues and put information out into the community. So I truly appreciate all of his years on the commission. And Mr. Thorpe just had a tremendous amount of expertise in the field of land use. He had a background in mineral and aggregate consulting, I believe, and that was really valuable over the years as we struggle through a lot of thorny issues. We didn't always see eye to eye on certain positions, Mr. Thorpe and Mr. Me and myself, but he was really, he was friendly about everything. He was professional, and he really made a difference on the commission. So I appreciate their time.
Very good. Any other comments?
This is Amber Bell.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. I just also wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to provide comment. As well, I really appreciated the service that both Commissioner Weeks and Commissioner Thorpe have provided, and I just wanted to also add that their participation record over the several years of service that they provided was impressive, and it was evident that they provided very thoughtful recommendations and read materials carefully, provided very in-depth technical insights, and we appreciated their time and all their energy that they spent on the Planning Commission. And I just wanted to also add that because they weren't unable to join you this afternoon, unfortunately, I'll make sure to provide them with a link to the webcast so that they're able to go back and watch this. And again, thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next item, which is 13A, a report, our legislative committee update with Alex Kyler, Intergovernmental Relationships Manager. And Mr. Mokrowski, if he has anything to add.
I don't, just want to make sure. Oh, there's Alex, okay.
Yeah, I'm here. Good afternoon, commissioners. I think you have materials in front of you that outline the report back from the August 7th Legislative Committee meeting. There were a couple things on the agenda, one of which we are bringing back to you today. I think the highlights of the meeting include that we are in the midst of developing our first ever set of bylaws, and that I think we can get those finalized during our next meeting. We had good discussion and good input on the draft thus far. What we really focused on and what we brought back to you for your approval is, if you recall, at the beginning of the pandemic, I think it was the March 31st, in fact, meeting of the Board of Commissioners, you adopted a suite of legislative principles that were specific to COVID-19. And at that point, we were relatively uneducated or unexperienced. And so those were mostly anticipatory principles. Now that we've had, I suppose, the unfortunate benefit of living through this pandemic, the Legislative Committee identified 3 new principles that are in your packet and that I'm asking the board to approve, to make a motion to add these to those previously adopted specific principles regarding COVID-19. These will continue to be important for us, I think, particularly as we get into preparation for the 2021 legislature. We may yet see another special session of the legislature even before that, and we're certainly going to be at least looking at, if not weighing in on the proposed budget that the governor will develop after receiving feedback from her agencies. So the 3 principles are in your packet. I think they're fairly clear. The first one is to ensure that employers and employees have sufficient and flexible family and child care resources, such that businesses and organizations may maintain resiliency through the duration of the pandemic. The second one is to ensure that state revenue decreases to local government are minimized and spread equitably across the state. And the third is to ensure public policy and budgetary decisions do not exacerbate the disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on already marginalized groups. I think these I hope they're very clear. I think the one comment that I would make to the board is that the second one about revenue decreases, couple things is, one is that we may not be seeing revenue decreases. The last revenue report out of the state was actually pretty positive. But I wanted to address just when we use spread equitably across the state, does not necessarily mean an across the board approach to making cuts. We've seen, and I think the you know, whether you agree with it or not, there have been certainly those people who would suggest that sometimes the legislature can be Portland-centric. Sometimes it can, I mean, even tax revenue is not, you know, distributed equitably across the state. Rural areas of Oregon actually receive a great deal of tax revenue out of the Portland taxpayer base. So I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that equitably distribution does not necessarily mean across the board. And if there's any better way to explain that, I'm all ears to anything that you might suggest. But that's the extent of the recommendation from Legislative Committee, and we hope that you would take the time to make a motion and add that to your existing set of legislative principles as outlined in Attachment A.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Chair, I have a question.
Okay, I'll do Commissioner Bozievich and then Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. So back on September 21st, Alex, I emailed you and Keir and Austin a set of concerns about land use relative to reconstruction in the fire zone. And one of those issues particularly requires state action to address. And I realize that's after your legislative committee meeting, but I will hope that as you go into your next legislative committee meeting that you will undertake looking at that relative to getting some clarity around what happens for folks in a forest zone that lost their homes and the issues that might need to be clarified at the state level rather than at the county level legislatively to make sure that there's no hiccups in their ability to reconstruct. I'm sure we'll address some of that on November 4th, but I don't know if your next legislative committee is between now and November 4th or not, seeing it's been since August 7th since the last one. But I just want to make note and kind of make the board aware of that I asked some land use professionals about what barriers might be there, and I forwarded that on to staff back on September 21st. And it includes one set of issues that particularly might need state legislative action.
Chair Buck and Commissioner Bozievich, thank you for that. Staff did actually have a meeting with Department of Land Conservation and Development because they are promulgating some emergency rules around in response to not only the Holiday Farm fire, but the other fires in Oregon. So we will have an opportunity to make comment on those rules. And the other thing I will mention is today I did email Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Burney, your representatives on the Legislative Committee, to see if they can carve out some time in early November. I'm looking at the 5th or 6th of November for the next Legislative Committee meeting. That's probably not going to be timely for what you're considering, but it is the case that these fires had not occurred when we had our Legislative Committee meeting. And so even today's conversation, listening to you discuss your previous item was informative for me to sort of get a sense of where the board is with respect to the rebuilding process. And I realize it is something that is going to be a priority for us. I will say that the LCD staff, when we talked to them, was very clear about their ability to write rules given the overarching legislative language. So we may get into the session with certain legislative concepts that are being written up, and I'm already aware of some of those that are in play by various advocacy groups. So I think we will have in the next report back at least a response to your inquiry about land use priorities and rebuilding after the Holiday Farm fire.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen and then Commissioner Farr.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to ask Alex about the state revenue forecast. I was looking at the executive summary that was put out. I think this was a DAS report, and they said previously when Oregon faced double-digit job losses, the recovery took 5 years. Once underway, all told, our office expects this cycle will be faster given the stronger economy before the pandemic and some limited amount of permanent damage to date. They said that collections in the March to September period were up, and they asked the question, could it be the recession might not have a significant impact on state revenues? Of course not. However, the fact of the matter is that the economic pain has yet to be fully reflected in Oregon's revenue data. So any guidance for this board or the one that'll start in January on whether we're going to see a decline in state revenue, setting off a fight over how the cuts are distributed?
Chair Buck and Commissioner Sorensen, that's an excellent question. I think that it actually speaks to that third bullet that we're asking you to approve. What I took away from the revenue report was that the higher income earners in Oregon have been less affected than the lower income earners in Oregon. So we've seen a lot of job losses in the service industry, for example. But those happen to be lower paying jobs. And so in effect, those with higher income ranges continued to pay taxes in Oregon. They did not necessarily lose their job, while those who earn less did. And so I think it's a reflection of how the pandemic has disproportionately affected certain populations. I think to answer your question, will we see, restated in other ways, will we see the sort of the length of the pandemic and the spread of it next impact higher wage or higher earners? And I don't know the answer to that. I do know that we've seen, more and more larger businesses being affected, and so will that have some impact then to future tax revenue? Undoubtedly it will, but my sense is that the economists are right, that this will be a shorter recovery, and while the impact will be disproportionately realized by a few people. That's what I think that they were saying.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Alex, I'll take this opportunity to say something that I say to you quite often, but I did hear in a Board of County Commissioners meeting. For those who don't know how great of an impact Alex has in the building in Salem, representing Lane County, Alex is one of the most highly regarded lobbyists in the entire building. And thank you for all the work you do, Alex. That being said, Commissioner Berney, when people want you to do something that they really need an answer from you immediately, they ask you in a very public place to give them an answer. And that just happened right now. Sometimes it's something you may or may not want to do, but Alex said he threw down the gauntlet on November 5th or 6th for you and I. So I think that means that sometime by the end of this day today, we should give Alex an answer on that one. By the way, Alex, November 5th is absolutely Guy Fawkes Day. And as an immigrant from England, I probably will be setting off fireworks that day.
Commissioner Berney.
Well, in the spirit of Commissioner Farr's remarks, November 5th works great for me. Alex, a couple of things. One is, oh man, my whole screen just messed up. I think it was your second point that where you've explained to us what spread equitably does not mean. I was wondering if you could explain to us what spread equitably, the way you've stated it, does mean to you.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Berney, it's a good question. Chair Buck. I think the answer I would give you is that, for example, we have different formulaic ways. The state has different ways to formulaically spread money across the state. Public health modernization, I think, is a very interesting formula that takes into account the burden of disease, for example. So you could have a small county that has, limited public health issues, not get very much money and not experience significant cuts. A county like Lane County, I think a great example, and where we came up with that language was when the University of Oregon previously experienced an outbreak, and I'm forgetting the disease that they did, but we found that
meningitis.
Meningitis, thank you. We found that the state did make some did recognize that, and so the emergency board did allocate some extra money. So it's those kinds of things where it really is specific to the service area, but Commissioner Bozovich, for example, is well aware of the formula for how community corrections dollars and justice reinvestment dollars are allocated around the state. The public health guidance is a little bit different. There's differences for economic development. They're all very different, and I think that's that's what I was trying to stress, was that we really pay attention to where these impacts are and how those formulas work when we think about equitable cuts.
Thank you very much. The other thing is a comment, and that is that I'm starting to notice at the state level, what happens a lot is that they'll say, achieve this goal or this level of service, and here's how you have to do it. Is there some way to flip that a little where, and forgive me, I know this is a 60,000 foot question, but where if the state establishes goals and service levels, they give more flexibility to counties in terms of how in fact we can achieve them? Is that, to me, that sounds like it kind of is a general thing that pervasively runs through various legislative mandates or legislative opportunities. Am I seeing that incorrectly?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bernie, I think I can give you two examples that are good ones. As I indicated, there was new money that Commissioner Bozovich is aware of, justice reinvestment. And there was a lot of discussion about making sure that those investments would be proven. And so built into the appropriations for that program is money for randomized control trials, which really do take away sort of the subjectivity, if you will, right? I mean, it really becomes, you study these programs. If they work, they can continue to receive funds. If they don't, they will not be funded again. The other example I give to you, actually probably more in your sphere of interest, in the recycling industry. We saw legislative policies that suggested that when communities were trying to reach their recycling rate goals, that there was a menu of choices to choose from. So a community like the size of Eugene could choose 4 menu items out of a suite of, say, 5 or 6 that the state had proposed. And smaller communities might only have to choose 2. And so that gave a lot of flexibility for local governments to comply with the state law, but also to sort of craft what they thought would work best within their community. So those are a couple examples that I continually look at. I think the one I described first, where there's really a proven way to show that the investment has been efficacious, is really good public policy. And I strive to, where we can, try to suggest to the legislature that it really needs to be able to study and prove that its investments are making a difference.
Thank you for elucidating what is efficacious. No, thank you very much, Alex. That was a great answer. Thank you, Chair.
Any other comments? All right, is there a motion to approve the changes to the legislative principles update?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion? Not hearing any, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item B, a discussion on our quarterly update of Equity 2.0 and Resolution 20-06-09-06. With us is Mo Young, our Equity and Access Coordinator, and Judy Williams, our Strategy and Integration Manager.
Thank you. Before I begin, I know, Diana, I was going to share my screen. If I can get. And while I'm getting that set up, Judy Williams, there we go, Strategy and Integration Manager. And let's see, put this on full screen. Okay. So we have planned for a 10 to 15 minute presentation. Again, Judy Williams, Mo Young, our Equity and Access Advisory or Coordinator, is also here with us. And we're going to do a quick presentation, and then we've allowed some time at the end for questions as well. So we are here for a quarterly update. And today our goal is to walk through briefly Equity 2.0, as we've referred to this topic before, our racial equity plan, review what we've covered over the last 3 months. Again, it's a quarterly update based on the racial equity resolution that you adopted in June. So we'll have an update there on what we've been working on in the last 3 months. And then Mo will be focusing on the listening sessions, a wrap up, and the Ferry Street Bridge project, and then leave it open for questions as well. So I wanted to go over briefly on the Equity 2.0 process, just as a recap and a reminder of the process. So last year we started to get everyone together to review what are our equity efforts and priorities moving forward. And so we had a facilitator. We really involved a lot of groups, our Equity and Access Advisory Board, that's an external body, our internal Equity and Education E2 committee that is made up of a representative of every department, our department directors, our leadership team, as well as you, our commissioners. And so through those processes, we focused on, everybody coming together on and bringing what your priorities were in terms of equity moving forward. And then we were able to prioritize those and come out of, as a result of that process, we've put together and adopted our racial equity plan, which you had seen earlier this summer. And then in June, as I was mentioning, the board resolution that's really supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as advancing racial equity work, that resolution has really been woven into our racial equity plan. And that plan, again, as a reminder, really has 3 components to it. So it's 1, normalizing. Number 2 is organizing, and number 3 is operationalizing. And specifically, normalize, what we're tackling here is normalizing racial equity through training and communication. Number 2, when we say organize, it's really through the use of data and through strengthening our equity program. And number 3 is operationalize, through the creation and implementation of an equity lens. And so along the lines of those 3 components of our racial equity plan, I won't read through every bullet item here, but we've been really busy in trying to come up with ways on how we can be most focused in our efforts moving forward as we tackle the normalize process. We work through organizing and then get to operationalize racial equity work. And as a reminder of the board resolution in June that we have woven into this plan, there were really 5 components that were passed in that order. Very briefly, I'll go over those, but the gist of the board order for racial equity involved 5 components. And one was to work with the community to acknowledge and address root causes of inequities. The second one was work with the community on anti-racist policies. The third was work on an equity lens to assess policies. The fourth was communicate about root causes of inequities. And the fifth, looking at policies and trying them out and knowing that if we fail, we're going to try again until it works right. So briefly, a couple of these that are on the list that we've been able to get through in the last 3 months was really formalizing the racial equity core team. And this core team is made up of a group of folks in the county that are very passionate and very have a lot of resources among themselves so that we can kind of use this body as a think tank in terms of where do we go towards, what are some of our next steps as we work towards advancing racial equity in government. A couple of the other things, and again, I won't read all of these, but this will be also available on the website as well. And Mo is going to be talking a little bit further about those, but we've created, established, and conducted 7 virtual community listening sessions as well. We have some follow-up work to do, and Mo will go into that detail. And then, really gathering that data too is something that we've also been focused on, and Mo will also talk about that. So with that, I will turn it over to Mo.
Mo, we need your audio.
How's that? No, okay, what's up? Is that better?
Much better.
Got it. Sorry, I'm going back and forth between so that I can have my webcam showing. Where'd my notes go? So I'm going to talk about the listening sessions and the Ferry Street Bridge project. And I just, I'm going to try to go through pretty quick because I know you still have a full afternoon. So we did 7 listening sessions over the course of 2 months. That averages out to be about 1 session per week, but there were many weeks where we had more than 1. We ended up postponing the public safety listening session and held it last week because it was supposed to be the week of the fire and there was just too much happening for everyone. Attendance of the sessions varied from 14 to 62 people, and the time spent in the session varied from 30 minutes to 1.5 hours. So the participation really varied in all the sessions. We're working with an intern from the 3 p.m. program at the U of O, and she distilled the meeting notes from all of the sessions down to the 5 main themes that you see listed on the slide: education, accountability, transparency, representation, and access. And I'll come back to that in just a second. I want to say that since we wrote the memo, we did have the public safety listening session. And 2 of the things that really stood out to me were that proactive partnership building remains important to folks in the community, and that may look different right now because there's a pandemic and we can't have meetings in person. And that training really in all aspects of our public safety system may need to be reassessed and should also be sure to include training on working with people with developmental disabilities and with specific mental health disorders. So our next steps are to hold a Spanish session, a session that's in Spanish for our Spanish speaking community members, and to hold 2 employee sessions so that we can hear what employees of Lane County think the county should be doing with regards to racial equity. We also plan on having on conducting root cause analyses in partnership with community, and we'll take those themes that we found that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and really look at the root causes of the things that the county has control over, and we'll incorporate that into the work that comes forward to the board, and then probably at the next report. And then we will use the results of the analysis to update our racial equity plans so that they'll be fused together. There won't be 2 different plans. And then lastly, that we'll communicate more about the survey. In the packet, in the board packet, you have the survey results, but we only had about 20 people respond. And although that was a pretty diverse set of people in terms of age and race and zip code, it's still just 20. So we'll try to get the word out about the surveys so that we can garner more information from community members. And then I just want to remind all of us that because of our experience with the GARE cohort and our membership with GARE, that's the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, we have access to tools, templates, and technical assistance to guide this next step. We're not doing it alone. We have a lot of support from folks both in the community and also outside of the community. So the other thing I want to update y'all on is the assignment from July. So on July 21st, we were assigned to return with a resolution of acknowledgement regarding the property ownership of the Ferry Street Bridge, a thorough examination on the Black experience in Eugene, and an educational walking tour. There was a request that staff meet with Ben Johnson as well as the NAACP to assist with this assignment, and that we should have a comprehensive review of the marginalized lands and Black experience in Eugene. And so what we've done thus far is we did have a really wonderful conversation with Commissioner Burney and Ben Johnson back in August. And I've been working with Melanie Svenru with the Quality and Compliance Office in Health and Human Services on creating a timeline and a map of not just the Black experience, but whatever history we can get our hands on for people of color in Lane County. And we'll show you a couple examples of what that looks like in just a second. We're also, Judy and I and Dan Hurley have been meeting with folks from the city of Eugene to talk about what we might be able to do in partnership with community and partnership with other public agencies to acknowledge the wrongs that were done to the Across the River community. And there will be more to come on that as that work moves forward. I'm going to share the next steps with that, and then I want to just share those last slides. So the next steps are going to be coming to you all with a resolution. You'll notice we don't have one today. To finalize the timeline and the map, including a method for communities to suggest changes and additions, and get it posted both on the county website and any other partner websites who would like it. And then to explore what the cost would be to create a monument or a plaque where that Across the River community was. And then the next handful of slides, just wanted to show you how pretty this timeline is. So it's fully interactive. It's done with Tableau. And so you click on a date and something like this will come up. And I'm sorry that the font is so small, but you'll see it says, 1949, and then there's a photograph. We've tried to get photos as often as we could. And then there's a little description that shows up to say exactly what we know has happened. And so if there are changes folks would like to see, we can do that. And then under all of that is the source, so that folks can look at more. And so we just have a couple of different examples of that. So here's another one. This is the map. So people will be able to click on different things in the map to see what transpired there. And Lane County is big, so it's not a walking tour. It's more of a driving, maybe a biking tour. I don't know if there's a couple more. So just to show you, I mean, I'm pretty impressed with the talent of Melanie to make my like random idea into something that's coherent and beautiful. So I wanted to make sure that we shared that. Here's the map without anything clicked, so you can see just as things are added what it'll look like. And then that bottom left square is kind of a blown up version of the Ferry Street Bridge area because there's a lot kind of happening there. And I think we walked through all those next steps already in our presentation. So now we just leave it to you all for questions.
Any comments or questions? Commissioner Burney.
Well, I just like to say, may I call you Mo publicly, Ms. Young?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mo, that looks really cool. Seriously, that looks so interesting. And there's such a paucity of civic education and history in our public schools. If there's any way you can think of that we might be able to facilitate once it's at a point that you like, integrating some curricular units, please let us know, because that was just a very powerful visual example. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I too very much like the timeline. And that'll be interesting to read when it's all ready for everybody. I think it's really important that we share the stories and get it out there and let people know what the history of the county is from a totally different perspective than what they probably grew up thinking and hearing. Commissioner Burney?
For benefit of my fellow commissioners and Mo, another thing that occurred in 1949, although I don't know if it was August 24th, was the gentleman that Mo spoke of, Mr. Ben Johnson, who's a close friend and actually was the first person I visited Eugene with 32 years ago. He became the center of the Oregon High School basketball championship team, and he entered the University of Oregon as a freshman. This is a fascinating individual, and Mo, if you want any follow-up, if I fell down on that, but I've talked to him recently, he said he's ready to do whatever he can to help you out. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Well, thank you very much for your work on this. I look forward.
I didn't press my unmute fast enough, but I do have a quick comment.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Ms. Williams and Ms. Young for their continued work on this, and I just think it's really important that we continue, both the senior administration, Mr. Mokrahysky, department directors, as well as commissioners, continue to support the important work of the equity effort. And I just want to thank them for the work they're doing, and also to make sure that we have senior administrators and department directors and commissioners continue to support the work. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr, and then Commissioner Bozievich.
Mo, I'm looking at you directly right now. Thanks for your tireless work. I've observed you working on the issues for close to 8 years now, and I want to particularly point out I had the listening sessions, the way they were handled, the way they were responded to. I attended 5 of the 7. Actually, it may have been 6 of the 7. And I'm looking at the condensed notes from the listening sessions. I think that you received an incredible body of information from that. And the notes have done a good job of capturing the notes that I took, which were nowhere near as thorough as the ones that you have here. But I want to hope that the board reads the notes from the listening sessions and here's what people did have to say, because the themes did continue to come up in 7 different listening sessions. 5 or 6 that I went to, similar comments came from very different groups of people. So very well done, very well consolidated, and just a wonderful body of information there.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say that the timeline is fascinating to me. I'm a mass consumer of historical information. I love history, even when it's not necessarily, all good news and heroes and stuff like that. We have to know all of our history, even when it's not put us in the best light. So I really appreciate the timeline. Is it available publicly yet, or is it just still in draft mode?
Not yet, but it should be soon. I think we're pretty ready to put it out as soon as we have a form for folks to tell us what else to add to it.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, that'd be great, because maybe some folks with additional photos and history can get them into us. Please email the board with a link as soon as it's ready. I'm sure we're all will love to browse it. Could you just talk for a minute? We mentioned it this morning during the PSCC budget item, but we're getting ready to do some work with the Public Safety Coordinating Council on equity. Could you just maybe mention that work for a minute?
Oh yeah, you're probably a lot better at speaking to that than I am, Commissioner Bozovich, but so I have been meeting with a couple of the folks from the PSCC to just imagine what working with that group on racial equity would look like. And so it's really at the beginning stages. I'm excited that the folks around the table are ready to start the conversation. My plan is to attend as many meetings as I can. I know I've been asked to facilitate a couple of things. They had to cancel last month's meeting, but at the next month's meeting, but yeah, I haven't been attending those meetings in the past, and so I'm not exactly sure what background to provide besides starting, a month ago, moving forward. I know that the conversation has been rich and people are excited, and there's a little bit of trepidation, but mostly just really excited to get started.
Yeah, and it will be a great forum for you to work in, because you're speaking to the public safety system from youth services all the way through to parole and probation, and EPD, SPD are all around the table there, including mental health services. So you're really speaking to the entire service system that people are concerned about right now. And I'm really looking forward to starting those conversations around the table and your participation in them. I know it hasn't really started yet, but I just wanted people to be aware of that, because you've talked about next steps a little bit. But as part of that, I think continuing work we're doing here in Lane County towards equity.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
All right. Well, thank you so much for what you are doing. And it just brings more and more depth to the county. I look forward to more in the future.
Awesome.
All right. Okay, we will continue on. We are back to emergency business again to revisit our emergency business from this morning. So I am going to recess the regular Board of Health and open the joint meeting of the Board of Health and the Board of Commissioners. First item is adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? I don't see or hear any. Any emergency business? No, I don't see any. So we'll go again to item 3, Health and Human Services. And this is order and resolution 20-10-05- or excuse me, 20-10-06-05. And this is coming back to us again this afternoon because staff needed to ensure that we filled in a very important blank on the resolution, which is how long the declaration should last. And with us again is Jocelyn Warren.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. Apologies for this item. Hopefully this will go a little more quickly than some of the others. And I'm happy to bookmark your day today. When I spoke with County Counsel, especially Sarah Chinsky, she noted that typically 6 months is a very standard time for FEMA. We'll usually say that that's about the time that it will take for cleanup. They like to leave at least 6 months. It could be sooner than that it's finished, but 6 months would be a fair amount of time to indicate. And we could use the commence date for us. My understanding is as soon as this is declared. So 6 months from the date of declaration. If Sarah is on the line and has anything to add, she can do that.
Don't hear her. Are there any questions from commissioners? So the particular sentence on the resolution says this declaration shall remain in effect for no longer than blank days unless ratified ratified by the Lane County Board of Public Health.
6 months, 180 days.
So is there a motion to approve the resolution with that language? Commissioner Bozovich.
So forgive me, this is my parliamentarian coming out with me. Do we need to have a motion to reconsider the previously approved, or we're still in the same meeting? So how do we deal with something we've already adopted once without language, without fill in the blanks? Do we have to bring it back on the table?
I'm sorry. Technically, we adjourned the first meeting, so that's why we had to bring up this new meeting. But you have a valid first question.
So how about if I move to reconsider the order so it can put it on back on the table?
How about if I second it?
A technical question, do we need to wait for another meeting to reconsider? And I don't know if Mr. Dingle's on the line with us.
I have an opinion on this too.
Chair Buck, this is Diana, and I did consult with legal counsel. I don't see Steve Dingle on the phone right now, but he did tell us we could bring this back today.
Okay, well, we'll keep moving forward then, and he can tell us if we do this wrong at the next meeting. Hopefully not. So there's a motion on the table to reconsider the original order and resolution from this morning by Commissioner Bozovich and second by Commissioner Burney. Any discussion?
Yes, this is Commissioner Sorensen.
Yes, Commissioner Sorensen.
Yes, I think it's proper to have this matter before the board, and I'm in favor of it. The Board of Commissioners is governed by the Lane County Charter, and so within a meeting, the board can bring up emergency matters, and this is within a board meeting, so I think it's appropriate. Also, I'm in favor of the motion. If there is a motion, there isn't one. I'd like to make a motion to approve it with the additional information. I guess that's the 180, right?
Let's start with the motion we have on the floor first.
Oh, okay. There's our motion on the floor.
All right, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. So now we have the original back for reconsideration. Is there a motion to amend it? Commissioner Bozovich. We need your audio.
Sorry about that. I have been on, off doing the vote. So I'll move to approve Order 20-100605 and filling in the blanks on the therefore number 3, commencing on this day and time in October 20th, October 2020, and the declaration shall remain in effect no longer than 180 days unless ratified by the Lane County Board of Health.
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Bozievich, second by Commissioner Berney. Any discussion? I don't see any, so I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And we will again adjourn our joint meeting of the Board of Health and the Board of Commissioners. And we will come back to our regular Board of Commissioners meeting to finish off the day. We are on agenda item 15, which is has 3 items. The first item is a discussion, next steps on redistricting. And I'll call on Commissioner Berney for this item.
Oh my God.
Well, I've learned never to volunteer to help out on a big topic again. What Mr. Dingle has put in our packets is the result of him and I discussing a potential process. So bear with me for a minute. I want to walk through with you the intent and then something that I noticed is not correct in here. Mr. Dingle, stay tuned. The intent is to follow the general direction given by the board, which had to do with creating a process where there could be as much input as possible, but have it be finite so that we could arrive at a decision in a matter that is thoroughly understood. So the reason that there is the first paragraph talking about a notice of a work session and it relates to the fact that we need to have a work session on it and other people need to provide input per our previous discussions. The reason it says Devin Ashbridge will prepare a press release is again to go to every length possible to solicit public input and make this accessible to everyone. The next paragraph says the board will issue specific invitations inviting them to make a presentation to the board, et cetera, et cetera. Let me explain why that's there and why those people are listed. Those people are listed because they are the only groups that chose or were able to make a input at our last input session regarding redistricting. I would guess that we should also send out at least an offer to the Republican Party of Lane County, only because that's the flip side of the political coin in terms of major parties, but they have not provided any input thus far. But that's why you see the League of Women Voters and Democratic Party having 15 minutes to present to us in a work session, and we have 15 minutes to respond to each. The reason it identifies individuals that will be specifically solicited to also input the work session and offer comments, to a general public comment session, is because those are the only people that provided us public input or when we offered to people to provide that input via email. That's why those names are there. That doesn't mean that you all or we all approve this process, but we have to have something in place, a straw man, if you would, to poke darts at and come up with a process that Mr. Dingle is comfortable staffing and moving forward. This last piece, Steve, remember there was some question about those 3 questions. Those are the original 3 questions, and then they were modified in your emails to other people soliciting input, but neither you nor I could see that, and you felt that was a cut and paste. I finally located it. So I'm looking at an email, sir, that were the 3 questions these were the original three, but the three after board discussion that you emailed to groups were one, do you have any concerns about the current redistricting process? Two, if so, what are those concerns? And three, what specific changes do you propose for the redistricting process? Those were the questions that guided the input that we got. So I would suggest we substitute those second generation questions from the first generation questions you see on the document. That's the procedure. That's the intent of the procedure. I'm sorry, Steve.
Oh, good. Ms. Jones has been email or texting me. I want to make sure you could hear me. I am listening. So those are great. I'm glad you found those questions, Commissioner.
Oh yeah, we didn't know. But anyway, I did, and I have them. And by the way, Mr. Dingle, those are questions that the only reason I know them is you were kind enough to copy me to the solicitation to the Springfield Chamber after our discussion. So that's why I was able to retrieve them. Anyway, please, if I did not explain that, it's because it's been it's been a long day, but I'm just trying to get something out there that we can flesh out and agree upon.
Thank you. Any questions or comments by commissioners? Commissioner Brozovich.
I just want to thank Vice Chair Berney for doing this work and fleshing out a process. I fully support just moving ahead with it and getting that public input and trying to put in place a process eventually that gets us to some agreement on how we're going to do redistricting. I think you did a good job, Joe, of herding the cats.
Thank you.
Any other comment?
This is Pete.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I am a little concerned about inviting just the League of Women Voters and the Democratic Party of Lane County. Wouldn't it be fair to say that we are inviting anyone who made written comments? You know, to me, the optics of inviting two groups when we receive comments from others.
No. That's not correct, no? Commissioner.
Okay.
No, that's okay. I probably didn't explain it well. The two groups, and I mentioned we might want to invite a third, would be invited to provide 15-minute presentations around those three questions I articulated. If you notice further down, every individual that provided input will also be solicited to do that again in another public comment session, and everyone will be invited to do that. So the intent is to be inclusive, not exclusive.
And if I can, Commissioner Burke, the other thing is, Commissioner Sorensen, remember that we sent all of these groups individually and specifically reached out to them for information. And these are the only individuals that responded. And that's how they got selected. Is that accurate?
I personally am fine with making the selection of who gets to make the bigger presentations. Apparently there were only two groups that actually said they wanted to be further involved and would give that kind of input. I personally think that seems fair, but I just wanted to say that there are other political parties, and I guess Steve Dingle, you did reach out to them as well, and if they didn't respond, whether it's the Pacific Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the Independent Party of Oregon or the Republican Party or whatever other parties received that email.
Yeah, those were all of those parties that you listed received the specific invitation to the session that we held a while back.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I also agree that Commissioner Berney, thank you so much for trying to read the tea leaves on what the board wanted. I think you did a good job. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. The intent, though, was even if I did not do a good job, for us to make it right now.
Very good. Okay, well, I'm supportive as well, and we'll have the agenda team put it on the calendar. Any other comments on this particular item? I don't see any, so we'll go to announcements. Are there any commissioner announcements? I'm not hearing any. So we'll go to the next item, any future board assignment requests. Just a reminder, we have over 20. All right, I don't hear any future requests, board assignment requests, so we'll move to item 16, review of assignments. Mr. Mokryski.
I didn't make notes of any assignments, so please tell me if I missed something.
I think there was the one, the land use date was a future board activity.
That was part of the motion, I believe, for a date for that.
Okay. And I'm not, do you want that to be an assignment? Do you want to turn that into an assignment and track it that way?
I don't think
this is
that.
Diana. We already have it on the list.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Okay, so the next item is item 17, moving to our executive session. So I'm going to read us in. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660, subsection 2, subsection H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed, sorry, there's a small child in the background. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come out into public session should the need arise. I don't see the need arising in this particular meeting, but we do reserve that right. So we will recess the regular Board of County Commissioners meeting and move into our executive session, and let's meet there at 4:40 to give us a short break.